and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, a 7-year inquiry has culminated in a scathing indictment of the UK's role in the Iraq War. But Tony Blair remains defiant. Why was the war a mistake? And we sit down with Faika Sibesma, CEO of Royal DSM, talking about his unique insights gleaned from his helm of a company that has transitioned from coal mining to biotech. We begin today's show with the Iraq War Inquiry. The British Public Inquiry into the nation's role in the 2003 Iraq War has published a 2.8 million word report, 7 years in the making. Sir John Chilcot, who led the inquiry, said plans for managing the Iraqi occupation following the 2003 invasion were wholly inadequate. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who has been accused of misleading the UK into the war, is facing severe criticism, to say the least.
Tony Blair, war criminal!
The Chilcot inquiry stirs up anger in the UK. Hundreds of protesters gathered at London's Queen Elizabeth Centre on Wednesday upon the release of the Chilcot inquiry, which examined Britain's involvement in the 2003 Iraq War. Those gathered included family members of soldiers who were killed in action during the war, and citizens who blame former British Prime Minister Tony Blair for his role in the war.
Tony Blair should hang his head in shame, because him and George Bush has made the world a much unsafer place.
Sir John Chilcot delivered his long-awaited inquiry into the Iraq War and outlined lessons to be learned from Britain's involvement in the 2003 conflict. The report is sharply critical of Blair, who went to war alongside then U.S. President George W. Bush. Although Blair has been out of office for nearly a decade, some lawmakers want Parliament to put him on trial. After the publication of the report, Blair made a statement in which he acknowledged his missteps and explained why he continues to believe it was better to remove Saddam Hussein from power.
Saddam was himself a wellspring of terror, a continuing threat to peace and to his own people. If he had been left in power in 2003, then I believe he would once again have threatened world peace.
Responding to the British inquiry, some Iraqis say the US-led invasion left the country in chaos, and the whole world is paying a high price.
Today, the world is threatened by terrorism because Iraq became weak. The weakness of Iraq has led to the weakness of other Arab countries and countries in the region invaded by terrorism after it invaded Iraq.
According to the report, the 2003 Iraq War resulted in massive death tolls and severe security threats to the Middle Eastern country. The latest statistics show that over 160,000 Iraqi civilians have been killed since 2003. The chaotic situation in Iraq during and after the war transformed the country into a hotbed for terrorist groups as well.
And for more on that, I'm joined in the UK by Dr. Glenn Ravala, who is a lecturer of Middle East politics at the University of Cambridge. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, we're having Mr. Renad Mansour joining us from Beirut. He is the El Arian Fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center. Meanwhile, in the U.S., we are having Mr. Jonah Blank, a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. I would like to start by asking you, Mr. Ravala, what do you make of the report itself? You're coming to us from the UK, and really, who is to blame about that war?
So the report has been called one of the most detailed analyses of any foreign policy that's ever been written. And it's 2.6 million words, it's 12 volumes long, and it's a very thorough account of all the different steps of the policy-making process that led to the invasion, and then what happened after the invasion, in British politics, in military planning, in diplomatic planning. What I think is interesting about it, and this is, I think, something that hasn't been fully appreciated yet, is the extent to which it's not just looking to blame people. It does have criticisms of individuals, but its most central criticism is not about individual leaders, it's not about institutions, it's about the way in which British foreign policy thinks about itself, about the very nature of British foreign policy, and the ways in which people in Britain haven't been asking, what is our foreign policy for a very long time.
If you could, if you could, Mr. Ravala, I'll give you 40 seconds, if you can, sir, to help us briefly understand,
okay.
according to the report, how the foreign policy of the UK was being drawn, particularly in the build-up to the war, if you can.
Yeah. So the central concern of British foreign policy in the lead-up to the war was about attaining influence with the United States. That's what the report says, that it was centrally organised around how to influence the United States. The idea that Britain gets a bigger say in world affairs by being a close ally of the United States. And the report is saying explicitly that it wasn't asked why we want influence in international affairs. What's the purpose of influence? What goal is to be achieved through having influence with the United States? And secondly, it says that by being close to the United States, it doesn't mean you get more influence with them. They take you for granted instead.
That's right.
Which is what happened after 2003. Rather than you getting influenced by acclaiming your loyalty with the United States, instead you're left sidelined in the decision-making process. So it's a more general criticism than a criticism of just one person or one leader.
Mr. Blank.
It's a more general criticism of the nature of foreign policy.
Mr. Blank, therefore let me go to you. What exactly is it? Of course, the debate inside the UK, as being illustrated by Mr. Ravala, is influence the means or is influence the goal? From the Washington perspective, what do you make of it?
Well, I think that this was an exceptionally useful study for exactly the reasons discussed. It shows how British policymaking occurs. From the Washington perspective, though, a lot of this has been utterly irrelevant. The decisions about the Iraq War were made within the White House and a very small circle outside it, largely in the Department of Defense and a few other places within Washington. And from an American perspective, it's useful to remember that President Barack Obama ran on a platform opposed to the Iraq War. Both presidential candidates, likely candidates right now, call the Iraq War a tragic mistake, and a solid majority of the American people thoroughly agree. So in the U.S., a lot of this decision-making has already been discredited.
But at the same time, we have been hearing, of course, a lot of criticism, but at the same time, do we have like official version of what went wrong inside the United States? Those are responsible decision makers along the production line.
No, we do not. And this is one of the reasons that the Chilcot report is so important. Britain has done what we in the U.S. have not done, which is perform what the Mills an after-action report, going back and in detail looking at what went right and, more importantly, what went wrong, so that we don't make the same mistakes in the future that we've made in the past.
Right. Well, Mr. Mansour, you've been listening to your two other colleagues. The question is, after knowing what went wrong, whether those mistakes will be corrected and whether similar mistakes will be made or will be avoided in the future. What do you think? For example, the war in Iraq and also many of the military conflicts and wars later.
Yeah, well, I think definitely, as has been said, it was clear that the war went wrong, and I think everyone in this part of the region, isn't a big guess for them to say that something went wrong, the war went wrong, and so you have this idea that maybe the UK and the US, maybe their interventions aren't necessarily a good thing. In an effort to democratize what they unfortunately was destabilize the institutions that govern the country, created ungoverned spaces that allowed different actors to emerge, and really allowed Iraq to become another battleground for different proxy wars and different interests, none of which being Iraqi interests. So definitely from the perspective of Iraqis, it is, I mean, they are kind of surprised that a country like the UK would have this level of accountability for a major foreign policy decision, but at the same time, not so much surprise coming that, it did go wrong, and obviously in terms of flawed intelligence, it was clear that, for example, weapons of mass destruction were not found.
Right. Mr. Ravala, though, at this moment, even with this report as thick as For War and Peace, the novel itself, We also heard from some of the key decision makers. For example, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair was still very firm in his rhetoric, suggesting a world without Saddam Hussein is much better than a world with. He probably has his point. The question is, how much price did we pay for getting rid of Saddam Hussein and getting rid of the regime? I think that is the issue here. But are we asking the right questions? And meanwhile, the loopholes, as being suggested in the report, you've rightly pointed out, Mr. Ravala, will those systematic problems be fixed? Who will fix it, given your government status right now?
Those are two very good questions. I think in the first of those, the effect upon the region, this was one of the strongest parts of the report. It did review Mr. Blair's account, it did review the reasons that he's been giving since 2003, and showed quite systematically why they were wrong, why the arguments that were made by Mr. Blair and his supporters don't work in trying to understand what was achieved through the invasion. So it is quite a thorough account of what the problems are of the arguments that we heard from Mr. Blair yesterday. On the question of who will fix these problems, that's a much more serious problem, because at the moment in Britain we have a political paralysis as a consequence of the decision to leave the European Union, in which there is no effective government and there is no effective opposition to that government. So in some ways this report is coming out at a very bad time in British politics, where attention is placed elsewhere. But on the other hand, this is a moment in which many in Britain are sitting back and thinking, what's our politics for? What's our objective in the world? How can we rethink our role now that we've left the European Union? And in that way, the report does fit into a broader debate about what Britain's role in global affairs is in the 21st century.
Mr. Blank, I'm afraid, as you mentioned, the same thing also in the United States. Of course, politics with their administration, but the question is, the things they have done, should they be responsible for that? And the systematic mistake, so-called no smoking gun at all, who should be responsible for that? Who will help them responsible? And eventually, will those loopholes be fixed? Mr. Blank.
A very good question. We in the U.S. do not have a good mechanism to bring that sort of accountability. The political process is the best way we have, and it has not really brought any kind of accountability. One of the most tragic elements, in my view, is the fact that by not having any sort of public accounting, the way the UK has had, of, for example, our torture policy, we used to have a consensus that torture was morally wrong and ineffective as a tool of policy. We're now seeing that consensus erode, and it would be very dangerous if torture were again brought back into the U.S. arsenal.
We are playing some of the backgrounders on our screen earlier with Colin Powell. We all remember him, a very credited politician to begin with, and yet put all his credibility on the line of this argument toward the weapon of mass destruction inside Iraq, and eventually lost his glory in a way with one incident out of a glorious life, professional life. But Ms. Bland, let me continue by asking you about this. So at this moment, how can we avoid another similar war will be built up, another campaign about so-called smoking gun, another campaign about getting rid of another regime will be avoided?
There is no.
I think by
Mr. Blank,
way
Mr. Blank, go first.
The way
Mr. Blank,
that the UK is doing. I think by looking hard at the past the way the UK is doing. In the US right now, there is no appetite at all for any foreign invasion, but in 10 years and 20 years, that very well may change. Take a good hard look, not merely at the intelligence that was wrong, but why it was wrong. For example, you don't need top secret clearance to know that if you mix into one basket the categories of nuclear weapons and biological weapons, which Saddam had never possessed, with chemical weapons, which he did possess, but did not pose any threat to the United States or Britain. if you make that analytical mistake, then you've already shifted the terms of the debate in a very dangerous way.
Mr. Rovalla, your thoughts here?
My thinking is at the moment about the changes to the British political system. There are many debates that have come out of Chilcot about the ways in which one individual, Mr. Blair, decisions without any effective oversight. Parliamentarians, members of the cabinet, were not aware of things he was doing. And so in this context, a lot of the discussion has been about how to make leaders more accountable, not just internationally, but also domestically for the actions that they have taken. And that, I think, has been a major lesson that's come out of the Chilcot process.
Talking about the accountability of leaders, of course, we've been hearing that quote many times, but let's hear it again. According to the report, Tony Blair, then Prime Minister of the UK, wrote to George W. Bush, then President of the United States, on July the 28th, 2002. He was suggesting this quote, "I will be with you, whatever." It sounds pretty much like a promise between friends, but then he, of course, warned George W. Bush of the potential difficulties of the Iraq War, but eventually he still stood with President Bush on this decision. The question is, what does it mean, personal relations or personal chemistry among state leaders vis-a-vis the most important decisions they need to make for their own countries and even the world?
Yes, personal relations are very important, and the chemistry of political leaders is a very important element in decision making. The chemistry between President Bush and Prime Minister Blair was a very significant element in how some of the decisions were made. But Prime Minister Blair's gamble that by trying to stick close to President Bush, he could therefore influence the outcome of decisions in Washington, that appears, according to the Chilcot investigation, that appears not to have been a successful strategy.
Mr. Rovalla, we've heard about,
yes.
you know, Prime Minister Blair is a very charismatic figure. So what? Prime Minister Cameron was making the decision when he was saying, let's have a referendum about Brexit or not.
Yes.
So I think it's a fundamental question, not just about the UK, not about the US, but rather the worldwide. What is the role of a politician? What power scope does he or she have in making a decision for the whole country and even beyond? Mr. Rovalla.
That's a very good question again, and this was part of the whole reason why the Chilcot process has been so important, because there has been a lot of mistrust generated as a result of the Iraq invasion. Many people since then have articulated their lack of confidence in political leadership, and many were looking to Chilcot to establish more reliable mechanisms for thinking about how people can have more trust in politics and political leadership. The answer to that is that there is no single answer. Chilcot by himself in one document, even though it's a very long document, cannot provide a formula for successful politics. There is no formula there, I don't think, that anybody could devise for how confidence can be restored in a situation in which a country like Britain has been involved in a major foreign policy initiative that's gone so badly wrong.
Right.
So I don't think we're going to find all the answers in Chilcot.
Yeah, we can't, and especially answers about what to do with the Middle East. Really, I have to go for your help, Mr. Mansour, and your expertise here. This is a Pandora box, as they say. The war in Iraq, 2003. It totally changed the paradigm inside the Middle East, and we've seen so many changes since then. Mr. Mansour, what do you make of what's being mentioned in the decision-making process built up to the war inside the UK, and how is that having an impact on your part of the world, for example, in Beirut and elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the 2003 war in Iraq had a huge ripple effect throughout the Middle East, and, you know, as we've seen. And it's important to keep in mind that most Iraqis actually wanted Saddam to go at the time, particularly the opposition group leaders who were in the offices of Bush and Blair telling them that Saddam needs to go. Now, the thinking was Saddam was in himself a problem for Iraq and for the region to some extent. And so they wanted him to go. So I think, and a lot of Iraqis today I know are kind of troubled with this question. Was it better before or after Saddam? And there is a certain element of nostalgia as well to Saddam. But I think that's a bit short-sighted, and I think that people shouldn't forget that Saddam himself was a dictator. And as we say, Iraq did not become a graveyard after 2003. It was a graveyard before 2003. I mean, he gassed the Kurds, he hit the Shia quite severely at times. So definitely from that aspect, it wasn't, you know, a rosy picture before 2003.
Right.
Yet, what happened after 2003? The U.S., the U.K., and the coalition decided to fundamentally remove the structure of government in Iraq, completely move the institutions of state, the army, many of the civil servants. And so the country quickly fell apart, as I said. And as it fell apart, many actors were able to move in and emerge. And many of the problems we have today, someone trace them back to that decision. The Islamic State doesn't come out of nowhere. For example, the Islamic State comes from Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was Zarqawi, who was there before, who launched a war against the occupiers at that time. So many of the problems we're having today are because of that. The system of governance that was set up, the 2005 constitution that was created in Iraq, created many of the problems we have today. So I think one of the more important points of the Chilcot report is how poorly post-intervention, how poorly the occupation was planned, that led to many of the problems we have today.
Mr. Mansour, I have to follow up by asking you two important questions. Let's go one by one. First of all, should leaders around the world make the decision based on ideologies? And how dangerous it could be if they do? Meanwhile, do we need to get rid of all the dictators in the world? We're still having, according to at least the Western media, quite a number of them. But the thing is, what is the kind of stories we're going to see after that? Should there be plan, and should others plan for a country that is not their own? Mr. Mansour, I think these are all very credible questions and fundamental questions to be asked. Ms. Mansour. Mr. Mansour? We are having a problems probably at the signals at this moment. Mr. Blank, please come in.
If you like, I can take a bit of a stab at that.
Go ahead.
I think that Mr. Mansour was absolutely right about the failure by both the U.S. and Britain to plan for what happens after Saddam was removed from power. And there are a lot of very bad rulers around the world, and one of the things the Chilcot report reminds us is that simply removing a bad actor does not necessarily bring a better outcome. You have to have a plan, you have to have the buy-in of the country concerned and of its population, and you really have to chart out exactly what's going to happen, not just during the campaign, but after the dictator is removed.
Of course, those are a lot of questions and food for thought. Mr. Ravala, what do you make of what I just asked of the other two gentlemen? At the moment that is critical, what should be a political decision taking off a regime based on? And should others make the decision for others' country to make that decision?
Yes, I think what Mr. Blank said was entirely right, that the Iraq situation shows what happens when there is limited planning for what happens after a government it departs. But what I also think is true is that there is no reliable mechanism for asserting order within a context which has lived with an authoritarian situation for better or for ill for the most part, as Mr. Mansour, a long number of for a very large amount of time. Iraq had experienced forms of authoritarianism throughout its modern history. There is no mechanism that's yet been invented that will reliably create a functioning democratic system. There is inevitably a level of risk. And that level of risk was, I think, in the Iraq case, not properly evaluated. There wasn't a plan for what to do, but there wasn't also thinking about how likely it is that a better outcome will arise in this context. There wasn't a contingency in place for what happens if there is a popular uprising, as there was in late 2003 when I was there in Iraq. What to do in this context? There isn't clear thinking about it. So one has to not just to think about what the best solution is, but what to do if your first plan doesn't work.
But you know, Mr. Rabala,
in the Iraq case,
yes, Mr. Rabala, if I could just come in here, is it possible for any outsider to really plan 100% accurate plan for another country? There is a lot of information deficit. There is a lot of deficit regarding to the thinking styles. And also, it really depends on who you are talking to, who your sources are. As we all know, the sources are providing with the advice and the information with their own political purposes as well. So, is it possible, the question is, Mr. Rabala, for an outsider, whether it's a country or countries, to make a decision for another country? Is it possible, and can that be in any way correct?
As I was indicating, there are good reasons to be sceptical of that possibility of anybody devising a system for not just their own country but also for another country on the basis of limited experience and inevitably a shallow level of knowledge when it's an outsider making those judgments. One of the interesting things about the Iraq inquiry, the Chilcot inquiry, is the elaboration of quite how little Britain knew about Iraq before 2003, how they were acting on the basis of little knowledge of the country, but still were making decisions that would affect every single person living in that country for generations to come. So that limited knowledge is a key problem in where outside forces come to take charge of the institutions of another country. So even if there had been lots of planning and lots of thinking, I don't think there's any guarantee that those plans would have been effective in restoring order and stability to Iraq.
I see. Mr. Mansour is now with us. I hope you can hear me well. Can you hear?
Yes,
Mr. Mansour, now we are not only just facing what is going on in Iraq, but also elsewhere in the Middle East. Syria, for example, is another case study, whether others should join in and plan for the country's future. And that is going to be an important step for the next step of your region in the Middle East. So what do you make of this? Outsiders come in, or actually we should let people inside the country to decide their own future? Mr. Mansour.
It's a very difficult question. I mean, many would say that outsiders are already in Syria to some extent, particularly regional outsiders, if you will. It's hard to see. I mean, Syria originally was a very local problem. I've spoken to many Syrians now in Lebanon or in Iraq, and it was a reform. They wanted reforms. However, it was to some extent hijacked by some stronger groups viewed as foreign-funded groups that were able to emerge. And so it kind of went from that a local problem to a regional problem. And all regional players are now have their hands in Syria. And again, this is a huge question, you know, and I think the Chilcot report is important for how we conceive and how we of intervention. Do we let Syria continue as it is? And you know, now we have more than 500,000 who have died since the conflict began. Is there any responsibility to protect? I mean, these are all questions that you know, international lawyers, but also human rights activists and other types of academics are trying to answer what needs to be done. And I don't think that there's an answer to it. It's hard to really see an answer from the ground of what should be done.
Well, I'm sure our discussion will continue because all of these important questions do not have sufficient answers. But for now, I want to thank all of you, the three of you, so much for your insights and your perspectives. Glenn Ravala, Renette Mansour, and also Jonah Blank. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Stay with us here on World Insight. We've got our next segment coming right up. We sit down for an insightful chat with Faike Besma, who is leading a company that has transformed itself to make a brave leap from coal mining to biotech, the transformation we're talking about for companies around the world. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. As technology continues to develop at light speed, it's fair to say that the world has entered the fourth industrial revolution. Transformation has become a process no company can ignore, but it's rarely easy. However, there are valuable case studies from which conclusions can be drawn. At this year's Summer Davos in Tianjin, I spoke with Feike Sibesma, a Dutch businessman whose company has successfully transformed itself from mining at the very beginning to now biotech. Before we go to the interview, let's take a look at this.
The technology revolution is improving people's lives, but also poses challenges to traditional industries. Only those who stay up to date with the times survive. And in today's world, for traditional industries like steel and coal, innovation and transformation is unavoidable. Royal DSM, a Dutch multinational company, is among those that have made smart decisions to achieve new success. The company was formed by the Dutch state in 1902 to mine coal reserves. By 1973, it had diversified into commodity chemicals and petrochemicals. The 21st century has seen DSM follow successive 5-year strategic periods of transformation and internationalization involving acquisitions, divestments, and partnerships. And now it's a biotech company active in the fields of health, nutrition, and materials.
Your company, DSM, originally was even being believed as the national mining company.
True.
But now it has turned itself into a biotech company. True. Or a bio-nutrition company. Many would wonder how much pain and challenges it went through in order to be where it is today. You were personally participating in some of the most important turn and twists of the company itself. Tell us about what happened then. Probably that could help us to understand what can be the way approach with our own change.
Well, the history of Royal DSM might sound familiar for many Chinese, because over 100 years ago we started as a coal mining company, a traditional industry and traditional company. And after 45, 50 years doing coal mining after the Second World War, we thought, is the future of our company in coal mining, or will we switch to new energies in Europe? Gas was found, oil was found, and also gas in the Netherlands. And we said the future maybe is not in coal mining. So we changed the company and used the gas coming from the cokes from the coal to change our company to a chemical company. And we became a bulk chemical company. Later on, the last 15, 20 years, and I was instrumental in doing that, we said, a bulk chemical company, will that be the future? And we said, no, the world is changing again, let's make it to a life sciences and material science company, which we are today, the largest food ingredient manufacturer in the world, large in new energies, etc.
But the question is, when did those questions come up to the mind of the managers?
Most companies start to transform too late, when the problems are really hitting the face, and then people think, okay, we need to change. Then it is too late, because the business you want to sell and you need that money to buy new businesses is worth nothing if you do it too late. Did do it on time and taking a long-term view whether the business we were in are in a longer run sunset business, which go down, or sunrise businesses. And we made this sunset, sunrise business analysis, and on time we divested business and acquired.
Yeah, but you know, Feike, but that sounds really easy, logically, but it's not easy. So let me ask you some specifics. The direction of the company, at the time when you decided on it, how much does it have to do with your own personal background? I know you are a biotech background yourself, but you know, how would you decide on it and convince everybody else to be on the same?
Not true, because you need to make the analysis like we did and like Chinese companies will do. But then comes the hard stuff about the leadership and about yourself. Realize that in every company, also in ours, the top management has been growing and developing in the old businesses. Apparently the top management was good in the old businesses, therefore they have been growing in the company. Right. And now that same top management need to change and to be good in the new businesses. The most difficult is that people say, are you going to stop? Are you going to divest the things that I put my personal life, former board members, former directors, employees, etc. And people don't like that. And you need to say yes. Yes, are you going to stop with what I put my life into that? The answer is yes, we are going to do that, but we do it respectful. We do it with the right things.
What do you mean by respectful?
If we fire people, we will do it with the right financial package. We will not divest over time. All the divestments we did, we announced it a year, 2 years before we really divested it. We, for example, set up also a separate company with the people we will fire. We will put in that company, and the only purpose in that company was to find new jobs for them at other companies or in our company or somewhere else. And we guided the people towards new jobs. Those kind of measures got, how can I say, a little bit trust of our own people. They don't do it silently, they do it together with us, they take us with. So I think the trick is to take the people with you, but still to dare to bite the bullet.
But how can you also be confident as a manager yourself about the directions? Because this is, as you said, very innovative society these days. Yeah. And the industry you're in, biotech and bionutrition, even more. So how can you be confident about your own decisions for all of these people that you're responsible for?
Well, if you change a company and divest businesses, stop and acquire new businesses, are you 100% sure that that is the right direction?
You cannot. Right?
It does not exist in life. Do I, in that change process, have sometimes doubts about myself or the decisions? Of course I had doubts sometimes. Is it right to do this? Is it right to do that? Because there is no booklet with a guaranteed success. So running an enterprise is taking risks also. And at a certain moment I'm convinced it's the right direction and we go for it. How do I develop the right direction? Traveling a lot, speaking with a lot of people. And I think you need to be open-minded. Those companies who did not change on time were looking inward. Take the famous example, which is known everywhere, Kodak, which continued to make films where the whole photo industry became digitalized. If you only look internally, you think you are the best, and you look internally further and you are convinced. If you have open-minded, open the windows, look outside, not only open the windows, but step out even the building and operate in the field. And I have been traveling so much, talking with people, and they give me insights, and then I learn, I combine things, and I said, hey, the world around is changing, we need to adapt.
Right.
The difficulty with changing, and I found it myself also, is you need to lift anchors, which are really anchored in the company. You need to lift that, which is dangerous because people like certainty, me too, all people, and to make new anchors. The only thing is, if you want to move, if you lift an anchor, you need to have a little while no anchor and then to have a new anchor.
Right, that was a very dangerous period of time.
Exactly. If you immediately put your new anchor because you lift the old anchor, then you don't move the ship. So the ship can only move if you lift anchors and have for a while maybe no anchor. Is that uncertainty? Gives that doubts about yourself, doubts in the people, discussion in the companies, changing leadership? Yes. It's the only way at the end to success, because you need to take those risks.
I'm very curious about those no anchoring days for you. Who are you going to communicate with?
I'm an extrovert person. I need to interact with people. My wife can confirm that many of those decisions I took in our garden by walking around in our garden and phoning with people. And then I phoned with people and said, we should do this, we should do this, is that true? And then people said, yes, this is the right direction. Then I called the next person and said, is that wise? No, that's not wise, be careful here. And then I collect my information by interacting with people, circling around in our garden. And then at a certain moment I make up my mind and said, listen, we do it and we go for it. And then I walk in the house and say to my wife, I think I know it. And we communicate.
Well, that's an important garden to visit, I guess. So such a pleasure to have you, Faikad, on CCTV News. All the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.